It's a great honor to be here. Just as it says, the Polish peasant in Europe and America, I guess it seems to be a coming together of Europe and America, Poland and the United States again. And I'm honored to be here amongst so many distinguished guests. And I would just like to thank the organizing committee for doing an amazing job. I have myself from time to time organized conferences and it's hell. So I congratulate you all on managing to do this and to bring so many people from different places. Yes, actually I should like specifically to refer to Dr. Zbierski. Apparently Dr. Zbierski's name means in Polish the collector, and well, she has indeed been a great collector of all sorts of different people here today. And actually I had the pleasure of an escorted visit to her field site, local field site, Tarnowo. Many of you may know this place, and was introduced to the amazing transformation of this area in the last 25 years, since the end of socialism. And there too she saw collected social entrepreneurs building, contributing to a museum of democracy, and also constructing a beautiful, well, I think it will be beautiful, center for cultural activities. It's a very important work that sociologists can do on the ground, and I'm sure that Znamiecki and Thomas would really appreciate all you're doing in the area. Yes, so I'm supposed to talk about the Polish peasant. Well, I know nothing about peasants. I study in I'm basically industrial sociologist, I study workers. I'd just like to echo what Dr. Zbierski was saying about the significance of the book, The Polish Peasant. I think it was way ahead of its time, and I think it is still way ahead of its time. If only sociology could actually aspire to the sort of work that they did. Sociology tends to be pretty provincial. It tends to locate the nation-state as the unit of analysis, and the one thing the Polish peasant did was actually to bring together movements that transcended national boundaries. And I really think that sociologists should all be forced to read, well, perhaps not the 2,000 pages, but Eli Zaretsky's abridged version. I don't think we read it often enough. They have, in fact, a vision of a global sociology that is all too rare, studying migration both from the sending community and the receiving community. And at the same time, also having an understanding of the transformation of both ends of the migration stream. Now, what I am going to do today is I want to essentially point out how sociology, particularly in Chicago, and particularly ethnography, is a diminished version of the Polish peasant. And I want to suggest how actually anthropology has actually moved in a more expansive way, that sociology has become introverted and anthropology extroverted, and that both have real problems, and therefore I would like to suggest a way in which engagement with both traditions can actually lead back to the ideas of the Polish peasant, towards a global ethnography. And to do that, I will talk a little bit about work I have done in Africa 50 years ago. It's a long time, 1968. So, all right. Now, I'm not sure whether I should be using PowerPoint or not. Since I made the PowerPoint, I might as well use it. So what I want to do essentially, I want to begin, as you notice the subtitle of my talk is A Tale of Two Poles. Now poles is of course an ambiguous word in the English language, and as you'll see, I am using both meanings of the word pole. The two poles, I don't know if you know who the two poles are. On the one hand, we have this very austere gentleman, Florian Zanieski. But there's another pole there. Anybody notice who this pole might be? Malinowski, thank you very much. And there's a great picture of Malinowski sort of engaging with the Tobrian Islanders in very serious discussion. You know, it's all dressed in white, white man, well dressed in white, and engaging in a very sort of authoritarian discussion, it would seem. But anyway, I want to talk about, in the beginning, as an introduction, the trajectories that these two poles have made vis-a-vis, on the one hand, sociology, and on the other hand, anthropology. And I want to sort of interface those two with the way I think about ethnography today. So I hope it's not distorting this conference to dare to bring in another pole. But at least I'm bringing in anthropologists. All right, let's see. Okay. Oops, I'm going to switch this thing on. Okay. A Tale of Two Poles. Well, let me just, since this is the introductory talk, let me just say a little bit of a fascinating figure, Florian Zanieski. I mean, he really is, the man was expelled from Warsaw University. That already makes him a great sociologist. It's the experience of expulsion that actually contributes to great sociology. Because he was opposed to Russian occupation and the imposition of the Russian language in schools. And as such was very sensitive to the question of colonialism. And you can see that in the first volume of the Polish Peasant. And then anyway, he left, he was not very welcome in Poland, he left for Switzerland and France, he came back and got a PhD from Krakow, and in 1913, W.I. Thomas, who was wandering around Europe looking at peasant societies, found Zanieski, and that began the collaboration that eventually produced the 5 volumes of the Polish Peasant, 1918 and 1920. As Suava said, it's a pretty big achievement in 2 years to produce 5 volumes. Yeah, we don't do that sort of thing anymore. And it is an extraordinary book. It is nothing. Both Thomas and Zanieski, they did not believe in interviewing. That never revealed truth as they saw it. The actual data was reliant on Thomas suddenly coming into his possession a wad of letters between Poland and Chicago. These letters revealed the day-to-day lives of Polish peasants in Poland and, of course, their lives in Chicago. They also used newspapers, but public records was the way in which they added to those letters. Yeah, so he established, as you know, and that is why we are here today, the sociology department here, Sociology Institute here in Poznan, and it was indeed, I believe, the first sociology institute indeed in Poland. And Poland, of course, has always had an amazingly well-developed sociology and has sent sociologists all over the world. I mean, of all the East European countries, Central European countries, including Russia, Polish sociology always stands out. I think that's an indisputable point. At least here. So yes, and then he went back to the United States after 39. He was in Columbia, University of Illinois, Urbana, and he actually became president of the American Sociological Association in 1954 and died in 1958. So that's the one pole, Florian Zanieski. Then we have Bronislaw Malinowski. Now you notice that actually they were born only 2 years apart. Malinowski's life was a much more sort of aristocratic life, and he was the son of academics. He got his PhD, like in fact Zanetsky did, from Krakow. And then he decided he was interested, I think he was in physical science, and then he decided he wanted to be an anthropologist after reading the famous book by Fraser, The Golden Bough, about different ethnic tribal groups around the world. He realized that this was not very scientific. He wanted to be a scientist and an anthropologist. And he went to the London School of Economics. He did his fieldwork in New Guinea and Melanesia, where the Trabayan Islands are famous, where he made the Trabayan Islands very famous with his book, The Argonauts of the Western Pacific, and of course many other books. And very significantly he invented, he created, he built social anthropology in England. And many of the most famous social anthropologists of the 19th century were his students. People like Evans Pritchard, Fortis Brown, Powdermaker, Hortensia Powdermaker, Audrey Richards. These were really very big figures in social anthropology, all students of Malinowski. The person that I associate myself with in social anthropology is a fellow called Max Gluckman, who came from South Africa, who spent his life attacking Malinowski, because of course Malinowski was the big figure. Yes, indeed he was. All right, so, A Tale of Two Poles. Now what I'm going to argue now initially is that the Polish Peasant was this global project with a global imagination that connected these two nations through patterns of migration, and that the Chicago school that Dr. Zbierski thinks I was a member of, because I was never a member of the Chicago school. I was just a graduate student at the University of Chicago, which is fundamentally different, Dr. Zbierski, as I'll say in a minute. But basically the Chicago school, actually I don't know if any representatives of Chicago school are here today, but anyway, it became more introverted. So I got a little graph here to suggest that. So there is Nanetsky and Thomas, the Polish Peasant, a global sociology, as I've been saying. The next move is to the Chicago school, and the Chicago school, the inheritors of the Polish Peasant, the people like Burgess and Park and Worth, they began to actually only look at Chicago as a sort of a model understanding of urbanization, an argument that has since been systematically undermined. But anyway, what I want to stress is that the focus on Chicago as the prototypical city was a narrowing of the vision of the original Polish peasant, and then it gets even more narrow when actually the ethnographers of the Chicago school began to focus on the institutions, on workplaces, on hospitals, that were made it even narrower and missed the broader context. When I was a graduate student in the University of Chicago, I could never understand how it was that these sociologists, ethnographers, thought that it was possible to insulate the communities in Chicago from the context that was shaping them. No. You know, they would have these communities and they would say, here are the tracks, here is a park, here is a hospital, and they would trap the community in this physical environment and not recognize that there was a world, shall we even call it, I don't know, capitalism, what there was lies beyond the community that was actually shaping the community. A very insular, provincial form of sociology. Now, let me look at the other direction. Starting with Malinowski. Now, Malinowski was responding in his fieldwork in Melanesia and Trabayan Islands, was responding to the journalists, the colonial administrators' imagery of the so-called colonial native. And these visions were very amateurish, thought Malinowski, very limited, very sketchy, and he, Malinowski, wanted to be a scientist of the lived experience, the world of the quote, native. And so he became very famous for the fieldwork that he constituted as a science, the systematic fieldwork, the situating of the observer in a village context over a period of years, that became the hallmark of anthropology. That was Malinowski, and he really invented a new way of doing social science. And the Manchester School, to which I belonged, I guess I'm now at Berkeley School, but the Manchester School, made up of anthropologists in Africa again, decided that it was not sufficient to study villages, but one had to recognize that those villagers were themselves migrants to, if they were, for example, in Malawi, or if they were in northern Rhodesia, they would migrate to the mines. In the case of the Malawians, they would migrate thousands of miles to the mines in South Africa. It was like they had to really recapitulate what the Polish peasant. So the anthropologists realized that you can't just study the village by itself, but you have to see it in a much broader field. And when those anthropologists, as they did, went to town, and they went to the copper belt in northern Rhodesia, they had to reinvent the very meaning of anthropology. Because there was no way in which you could enclose communities in the urban context, and you can enclose a village, even though that was itself suspect in their vision. And anthropology actually moved on beyond the Manchester School to global post-colonial studies. As many of you may know, anthropology has found life very difficult when they realized that their whole fieldwork depended on the existence of a colonial order that was absent from their prior analysis. But they discovered that the very things that they were able to study was a function of colonialism, and that led them to actually discredit, delegitimate their founders, the Malinowskis, the Evans Pritchards, the Fortis Browns, who in a sense systematically obscured the context which made their fieldwork possible. And so they left. They soon became a discipline without discipline, a discipline without founders. And though they began to see the world globally, they had no theoretical mooring to understand globalization. And so, in a sense, we come back to the Polish peasant, because in fact, I believe that Thomas and Znamienski, though they, as Swaber has said, though they did indeed think about the relationship between structure and agency, values and attitudes, they did not have a theory of globalization. They described migration, but they did not have a theory of why it was that industrialization in Poland was leading to migration, was leading to a connected world in Chicago. That is what is missing from so much ethnography. Theory. The theory that was produced, and this is what Znamienski would argue, the theory that was produced inductively. You look at the data and, oops, Bob's your uncle, out comes theory. Philosophers of science, historians of science know that that is not how science works. Science works through the reconstruction of existing theory. And that is what we do as a community of social scientists. We have a shared body of knowledge which we continually advance, rebuild, improve, reconstruct. We do not operate, if we are to be a science, inductively. And sociology, I believe, and this is one of the virtues of sociology, is that it continues to refer back to its founding theoretical figures, many of them problematic, but still great figures, the Marx, the Webers, the Durkheims. They still offer us a way of thinking about the world, and each develops its own tradition of the reconstruction of its founding figure. That, in a nutshell, is where I'm going. So my discussion today is really a dialogue between the Manchester School and the Chicago School. The one I'm developing, the other I'm rejecting. I'm developing the Manchester School's idea of the extended case method, which is something that they developed as they moved from the village to the town. and I'm going to illustrate my understanding of the extended case method. But let me warn you, I use the same expression as the Manchester School used, but I am going to give theory a much more prominent place in the process of developing ethnography than the Manchester School did. The Manchester School was, again, very inductive in the way it approached the world. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a story about my research when I was very young. But it's my favorite research, and probably my best research, and the rest of my life has been a waste of time. The extended case method, in my view, has 4 elements. First is that the observer, this is a simple ethnographic point, the observer, the social scientist, extends him or herself to the participant. They go and join the participants in their lives, watch them in their lives. They don't take them out and interview them, they join them in their lives, in their space, their time. And they do it not just by sticking their big toe in the water and then pulling it out, but by spending time, often years, with the people they study. That's the second point. This is not controversial. Now it gets a bit controversial. Third point. That's why I draw lines, controversy. Extending from the micro to the macro, I believe that we cannot look at the micro processes without understanding the broader context within which those processes take place. You cannot understand what's going on in this room if you don't understand Poland, or sociology, more broadly, or the fact that this is not Warsaw, this is Poznan, or that in fact in this area around us, there is development, industrial development, post-industrial development, I should say. Yeah, so one cannot look at the micro without looking at the macro, and I'll illustrate that in a minute. But one cannot move from the micro to the macro. One cannot identify the forces in the macro context without having some guidance as to which forces to look for, and that is none other than having some sort of theoretical framework that actually gives you a sense of what are the important forces at work. And therefore, the fourth point is that you extend theory. You take theory and you improve theory with your ethnographic research. Those are the 4 simple elements of the extended case method. You take a photograph of that as well.
Making me self-conscious all my life.
That's what I'm here to do, no?
That's what the mentor-student relation is, in a nutshell.
But as Foucault will tell you, the surveiller always also feels surveilled. Yes. Okay, there's Africa. I'm going to tell you this story of a process of Zambianization, the localization of the labor force in a country that became called Zambia after independence. Zambia was, I'll tell you a little bit about it, but first let me say that, let's see, there we go. There is Zambia, surrounded by Angola, Tanzania, Congo, Zimbabwe, and this country used to be called Northern Rhodesia. And what is distinctive about this country is its copper industry. That is what was important for the colonizers. The British colonizers saw Zambia as one thing and one thing only, copper. And they made a lot of money from the copper. Let me tell you, there was a British colony until '64 called Northern Rhodesia. I arrived there in 1968. Population 4 million, 2 multinational corporations, Anglo-American Road Selection Trust, that ran the copper industry, 50,000 employees, and very important, 15% of them were whites. Yes. The rest were black, Africans. Copper provided 90% of the foreign revenue at the time of independence and 50 to 70% of the government revenue. It was an economy focused on the production of copper. And notice, independence of 1964, there were 1,200 graduates of high school only 100 graduates of the university. So this was not a country that had a well-developed educational system. That's colonialism. That's something that Znaniecki understood. Okay. The issue I was interested in was what happens in post-colonial Zambia to the color bar. The color bar is a principle in which white governs black. No black gives any orders to any white. It is a racial color bar. What happens to that color bar in a time of post-colonialism? The raison d'etre of post-colonialism was to get rid of the racism, the racial order, and thus of the color bar. So what happens to the color bar? There we go, there's the color bar, white over black. No black gives any orders to any white. And when I arrived in '68, the government had put out this wonderful Zambianization report saying, look at these wonderful figures. Figures are always wonderful. What they discovered is that from '64 to '68, there were fewer expatriates and there were more Zambians in expatriate jobs. Fantastic. But is it? If you were to have 5 minutes looking at these figures, you would discover that then you add them up, there are more and more jobs. Something weird is going on. But you wouldn't know it from the report. The report says, the Zambian government report, everything is going fine. More and more blacks are now in white positions. So, I wanted to go and study this as a process. Now, how do you study this process of localization, of whites being substituted by blacks? You have to go in and watch. But who's going to let me go in and watch? This is a racial order. 4 years after independence. And if I go to the copper industry and say I want to study the color bar, they'll say, no, you're not studying the color bar, you're getting out of the mining industry. This is much too tense, much too contentious an issue. And so, this was a time before IRPs, before human subject protocols. I managed to get a job in the industry, but not telling people what I was going to do. So, how to study Zambianization? You have to be there. How do you be there? You have to gain entry. Well, I was lucky. I have a maths degree from university in England. That gave me privileged access to the labor force in the copper industry. I happen to know, because I had slept in the back garden of a top executive of Anglo American, which was one of the mining companies. And so I knocked on this guy's door. I said, I'm looking for a job. I was penniless at the time, and I was genuinely looking for a job. And he said, there are these jobs. And I chose one that actually gave me access to the relations between the trade union, government, and the mining industry. Well, so I gained entry. And essentially, and this is a very important part of the ethnographic process, I did not, at this point, tell people what I was interested in, and it so happened that they gave me a task that was only suited to a mathematician. They didn't realize it. The idea was to bring together the wage structure of blacks with the wage structure of whites so that there was a single wage structure. To do that, you had to develop what is called a job evaluation scheme, and to do that, you needed some at that point, seemingly sophisticated mathematics called linear programming. And I was the only person with that expertise in this unit, and that gave me access to absolutely everything in the mining industry. An accident of history. And of course, my colour. Yes. So there I was. So that's gaining entry, the extension of the participant, the observer to the participant. Now, observations over time. I basically studied this industry for about 3.5 years. And what I observed, and in this regard, I was not telling people I had resources. I was saying, I want to be a sociologist. That was my dream, to be a sociologist. I don't know how many other people dream to be a sociologist. I always used to dream about it. And so I thought, what is a sociologist? A sociologist does surveys. So, okay, we'll run a survey of the conditions of workers on the mines. But the real thing I was interested in was to talk to the people who were doing the interviews, namely the personnel officers who knew what was going on the mines. And it's through them that I actually began to understand the process of Zambianization. And let me just take two cases of Zambianization that sort of capture what was going on. Well, the mine captain was the highest level of supervision underground. In this mine, copper was being mined underground. It was not an open pit, it was underground. And the mine captain was the highest level of supervision. And when I arrived, it was largely white labor force. Mine captains were white. So the idea was to make these white mine captains black, to actually have Zambians in that position. So what was happening before? You had an underground manager, you had a mine captain, that was white, and now below them we had a shift boss black, a section boss black, and workers black. Now, afterwards, well, what happens? What do you think happens? What do you think happens when the mine captain, the white mine captain, becomes a black mine captain? What do you think happens to that white mine captain?
They became shift boss.
They
became shift boss and section boss.
Oh, you think they will be demoted?
Yeah.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, so there will be a black mine captain, and the black mine captain would go down, and so it would mess up the color bar. Right. Well, that would be a great solution. That's a utopia. But that's not actually what happened. What do you think happened? Hands up. I'll speak up.
You got promoted.
Very good. But to what?
A new position.
Ah, you see? You are born managers here. Very good. Yes, a new position. That is exactly what happened. That is exactly underground manager, assistant underground manager, new position. Yeah. So the mine captain, the white mine captain becomes an assistant, and now we have a black mine captain, black shift boss, black section boss, black workers. I mean, you're right. I mean, it would have been best if it had gone the other way, because this created a lot of trouble. Because what happened when the assistant underground manager basically takes over the tasks of that, brings the tasks and some of the resources of the mine captain up. The new mine captain actually has the same obligations underground, looking after the shift bosses, but with fewer resources. And so what happens is the shift boss, who is the subordinate of the mine captain, says, oh, this new mine captain is incompetent. So the black shift boss says to the black mine captain, you are incompetent. And the shift boss gets very annoyed about this whole process of Zambianization because of the way it is done. Basically, the white mine captain takes with him resources that should normally be given to the mine captain in order to enable the mine captain to fulfill his tasks. No longer does the black mine captain have those resources, and you generate a lot of conflict and tension. Okay, and then you get this conflict within the black hierarchy. Okay, we could do another one. Okay, let me just illustrate the same principle again. The personnel department was a very crucial department in the mines. It basically ran all the industrial relations, both black and white. But with post-colonialism, with independence, things began to change. So originally you had a personnel manager that was white, you had personnel officers that were white, stationed at different workplaces, then you had clerks who were doing the translation work between the white personnel officers and the black labor force, and there you have the black labor force. So what happens? Interesting. What happens in this case is that the personnel manager becomes suddenly black, all the personnel officers become black Zambian, and so the entire personnel department is Zambianized, and then shifted aside so it doesn't deal with white workers. And white workers are dealt with by this gentleman here, the staff development advisor, who sits in some small office where nobody can see him, but he controls the power that was before monopolized by the personnel manager. But in each case, the color bar is retained. It may float, but it's retained. Yes. Yes. So, Zambianization is a process. The reproduction of the color bar. The organization becomes top-heavy because you're creating all these new positions. And the tensions within the organization intensify as the black shift boss and thus the section boss get very pissed off with the new black mine captain who does not have the resources to actually deliver on his supervisory responsibilities. There's nothing worse than having a weak supervisor. Some of you may or may not know about this. Yes. But also the strong supervisors can be a pain in the neck too. Yes. All right. So, the question is this. Is this happening everywhere? Well, some ethnographers would then go from mine to mine to mine, all the mines, and do a study and see if it's the same everywhere. I was convinced that it is the same everywhere. All the evidence suggests that it's exactly what was happening in all sectors of the mining industry. So I was interested in the question of why. And the only way to understand why was to move out. This is the movement out, extending out, micro to macro. Well, what is the Zambian successor? The Zambian successor really was concerned with actually the process of Zambianization. He had an interest in it. He had a material and symbolic and status interest in Zambianization. But Zambian workers, they could care less. What are Zambian workers interested in? Not interested in Zambianization of their bosses. They're interested in better working conditions and more wages. African trade unions, in as much as they are supporting the African workers, had a similar position. They are bargaining for better working conditions and for higher wages. Mine management, they really are not interested in Zambianization. They want to keep their positions. And they are very lucrative positions indeed. And they are specific to the mining industry, in this case the copper industry in Zambia, because the conditions are so specific in each mining industry, they can't easily get a job elsewhere. They have a definite interest in hanging on to the color bar. Mining companies, now there is interesting because the mining companies, you might think, would be interested in actually more and more Zambians in expatriate positions because that would save them a lot of money. But the mining companies are making a lot of money, and they think, well, do we want to push this cheap labor project? It might disturb the entire managerial hierarchy. And then they said, well, in fact, it's one of the most interesting discoveries of a participant observer, as I was the way management works, top management works in this context. I was looking everywhere for some principle of their behavior. I was looking through all the documents. They must have some principle of how they're behaving towards the government and trade unions in post-colonial Zambia. I looked and I looked and I looked. And I was fabricating some stuff in my head, but then I also watched. I watched how they operated on a day-to-day basis. And what would they do? They get up in the morning, they lick their finger, and they see which way the wind is blowing. They didn't plan. They couldn't plan if they had any sense. Because if they planned, that would mean there was a rigid perspective, yet the world around them was changing. There were too many uncertainties. The price of copper, the Zambian government, politically unstable, and technologically, the mining industry is actually something that fluctuates a great deal. So they thought that basically you cannot plan, you have to make decisions on the spur of the moment. One of the problems of US multinational corporations in Chile, for example, was that they had a plan, and they pursued a plan, and they got into big fights with the government because they wanted always to execute their plan. These people were much cleverer. They were much more flexible, adjusting to the changing reality. So they adjusted to the Zambian state. What is the state going to do? The state needs what? It needs money. for all sorts of things. And the money was coming from where? From the mining industry. As I said, 70% of the, well, 95%, 95% of the foreign revenue was coming from the copper industry. So they thought, we like this money. We must let sleeping dogs lie. Don't touch it. If it's okay and nobody's protesting, we will continue with the color bar. They didn't want to know about it. They shut their eyes and said, the mining industry is delivering revenue, and therefore, we will leave it alone. Just try and impose the dissolution of the color bar would so disrupt the mining industry, they feared, that expatriates would leave and the mining industry will be left in the hands of those who were not, they thought, competent in running the industry. And it was also very convenient to have expatriates in managerial positions because those expatriates didn't have much power. They were now on 3-yearly contracts. If they were actual Zambians, they could actually, as they subsequently did, they could form a political party that would rest upon the actual resources of the copper industry. Better have expatriates, you can expel them tomorrow if they create trouble. So they let sleeping dogs lie. So if you add it all up, you can see why the forces are there to reproduce the racial order, the color bar. So you have class interests reproducing a racial order. The class interests of the state and the mining companies combined to see in the racial order the possibility of stable profits. And what you see also is that the post-colonial state appears to be relatively autonomous, deciding and setting the agenda within which the copper industry operates. But of course they are setting that agenda knowing that the copper industry is the crucial player in generating profits. Yes, all right. So that's point number 3, extending from the micro to the macro. And how crucial that is if one's to be an ethnographer. Yes, and finally, you can only do that if you work with a pre-existing body of theory. You've got to know how to do that extension, and theory gives you that idea. And in my case, I was very influenced by 2 people. One is a sociologist by the name of Alvin Gouldner, who some of you may know for a very famous book he wrote, The Coming Crisis of Western Sociology, which was a devastating critique of Talcott Parsons, a book that Gouldner wrote in 1970, but he wrote before that some amazing studies of industry, and he developed the idea of succession. And he has a wonderful study in the Patterns of Industrial Bureaucracy of a manager, old Doug I think it was, got succeeded, he left and was succeeded by another manager, and Gouldner describes exactly what the new manager, the new successor actually does, and how they draw in particular supporters and how they build coalitions and alliances within the enterprise. And that is a sort of a natural attrition. Here we have what I called a forced succession. So I took Gouldner's theory and sort of reconstructed it for this different context. So that was one theory I worked with. And the other theory was a fellow called Frans Fanon, who wrote a book, The Wretched of the Earth, which was very widely read. A brilliant sort of analysis of post-colonial relations, seeing the intersection of class and race. And his ideas about how class and race intersect was shaped very much by his own participation in the liberation struggles in Algeria, but that had a very different political economy, and I sort of reconstructed his theory to fit the very different political economy of Zambia. And that was the theoretical basis for me to extend out to these various forces. Yes, so here we have, I extended myself to the mining industry. I watched the mining industry and participated in management for some years. I extended from the micro to the macro, and in order to do that, I extended theory, the extended case method. Now it gets interesting. So, I write this up. Being a budding sociologist, I want to get it published. But it was not because I was a sociologist and I wanted to publish it. I was outraged. I was what? How old was I then? 21, 22. I was outraged that the color bar racial order was being reproduced. And nobody was saying a word. So, what did I do? I went to the mining industry and I said, look, this is what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years. The irony was that I had been this backroom boy with this job evaluation scheme, and they had been so happy with all my work that they gave me a fellowship to go to the university. Very nice of them. I had not told them what I was doing on the copper industry. I was a spy. This would not be possible. I want to emphasize, this would not be possible today because you have to go through these review bodies, human subjects. You can't study up, they're not going to let you. I can't go to the mining and say, I want to study the color bar. They look at you, they're crazy. You can only study those who are vulnerable, who can't resist you, who have nothing to hide. It's a real interesting dilemma, the introduction of it. Do you have these review bodies here? You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? Well, in the United States of America, when you want to do research, you've got to fill out a human subjects form, which says exactly what you're going to do and how you are going to get the consent of those you interview, you observe. And ethnographers are really problematic because some review bodies will say, and the universities these are, some review bodies will say, you've got to get the consent of everybody you might possibly interact with. That's an impossible situation. And it's definitely difficult to get consent from those who are powerful. This all came from the biological sciences, medical sciences, where there were some real ethical problems in the ways that research was being conducted and then got transmitted to the social sciences. Anyway, this was 1968, 72. There was no such thing as these review bodies. And I was not even part of this research was not part of the university research. This was rather informal and unofficial. Anyway, the point is, I managed to, went to the conference and I told them what I was doing. They were shocked, dismayed and disgusted and said, Michaela Burawoy'a, you are not going to publish this. You must be out of your mind. And I said, why? Why cannot I publish this? It is the truth. It's based on your data and my observations. Do you deny it? Doesn't matter. We don't agree with your interpretation. Come on, I said. And they said, well, the mines have been nationalized. Why don't you go to the state? Why don't you go to the ministry responsible for nationalization? See what they say. Of course, I've been as critical of the state as I was of the mining industry. So, I mean, this is all wrapped up in sort of Fanonite language. I mean, no, it seemed impossible that anybody would give me permission to study this. So I went to them. I went to the official responsible for Zambianization in the Ministry of Mines. He read it, took me aside, interrogated me for 3 or 4 hours. I'd obviously heard I was a troublemaker, and at the end of the 3 or 4 hours, I said, well, okay, well, what do you think of this study? He said, it's a magnificent study. It's objective. I said, really? Shocked. Why is it objective? Well, you criticize the workers, you criticize mine management, you criticize the trade unions, you criticize the state, you criticize the mining companies, you criticize everybody, therefore you're objective. Take that as a definition of objectivity, when you teach your students. Criticize everybody and you're objective. So he said, you publish it immediately. Publish it immediately. So, permission. So I published it. And what was he up to? He was responsible for Zambianization. He took it very seriously. That was his job. And so, this is the part of, revisiting, giving back the work to those who it affects, seeing how they respond. And in this case, the guy in the Ministry of Mines wanted me to publish it. It suggested that I had a flawed theory of the state. Because I thought the theory that the state and the mining companies were in cahoots, but clearly they are not. So there already, by bringing back the study to those who it affects, you learn more. I didn't rewrite the study, but I probably should have done. because it was clear that the state and the mining companies were not so closely in a collaborative relationship. So anyway, that was the first point I learned. That publication is a social process which has to be understood in its own terms, and also has implications for the theories you're developing. So I had to, in principle, which I didn't do, develop a more sophisticated theory of the state. And then it gets published. So what happens when it gets published? Well, it was amazing. It was the only some people associate my name with the word public sociology. But I'm an evangelist for public sociology. I don't really do much public sociology, but this was a project of public sociology. And what was interesting is that once this was published, there was a lot of discussion in this relatively small country about the process of Zambianization, of localization, of race and class. But what was most interesting is that the multinational corporations used this Fahrenheit class analysis to actually condemn their own managers and told their own managers to get their Zambianization house in order and actually to dissolve the color bar and not continue to reproduce it. So there you have it. You never know when you produce something what's going to happen. You never know who's going to use it. And it's usually the most powerful people that will use it for their own ends. Even if that document is a frontal assault on them, they will still use it for their own ends. Now that's a lesson that I carried with me forevermore. The idea that knowledge and power are very closely related, and that in fact the dissemination of knowledge is usually biased towards those who have power, which makes the idea of public sociology a rather tricky and delicate operation. So that's the second. And the third, part of the problem, and here we're back to Thomas Znaniecki and the Polish Peasant. This was a national study. My unit of analysis was ultimately the nation state. When I extended out from the micro to the macro, it was to the nation state. And I believed that that was the appropriate way to do it. It was not appropriate, I thought, to go global. Because the dominant class, the elite, always blamed everything that was going on back, everything that was not working in Zambia on some external force. Neocolonialism. Oh, it's the continuation of colonialism. And I would say, no, that is obscuring the class character of what is going on in Zambia. But the fact of the matter is, those global forces, and in particular, multinational corporations, the World Bank, the IMF, and the price of copper, are crucial to what is going on in Zambia. So one has to have a historical understanding and a global understanding, just what the Polish peasant actually offered us. So let me just end by showing you what happened in Zambia after I left. By the way, every field site I leave gives rise to disaster. I have done studies in Chicago. South Chicago became an industrial wasteland after I left. I have done studies in Hungary, and state socialism and all its wonders crashed. And the steel industry that I was studying crashed with it. And then I quickly went off to Russia, and within about 8 or 12 months, the whole place had dissolved. So people didn't say, actually after that they said, Michael, you have got to stay in Russia, you've got to live with what you produced, you're going to stay up there in northern Russia, a place called Syktyvkar near the Arctic Circle, and you're going to observe and participate in the devolution, involution, degradation of life in post-communist Russia. Anyway, the point I want to make is what happened in Zambia. Here is the price of copper. What happened then was here at 73. So I was there from 68 to 73. You can see the price of copper was pretty high. And then look what happens after I leave. So the price of copper goes down. The mining companies go into deficit. They are forced, and they have not diversified the economy. So they have to take more loans out, they take loans out, they take loans out, and then the IMF says no more loans unless you start privatizing. So they started privatizing. They started privatizing everything but the mining industry. But in the end, the IMF said you've got to privatize the mining industry. You've got to sell it off. So what do? They had, by this time, actually got Zambians in all positions of power in the mining industry, in managerial positions. Slowly but surely, partly because of the criticism of the colour bar, they were run by Zambians. But they can't sell the mines if they're run by Zambians. So what do? They recolonize the mines with experts from around the world to give legitimacy to the mining industry so that it can be sold. But the price of copper is so low that they have to beg people to buy it. So in comes multinational corporations, footloose capital from India, from Switzerland, from Canada, from South Africa. They buy up the mines. Privatization. Do you notice what happens after privatization? Oops, sorry. Price of copper goes up and up and up. And they make a fortune. They make a bloody fortune. I mean, you know, you can only believe it's conspiracies if you see this. So they sell the mines at a low price, and then these multinational corporations, what's most interesting, which is revealed by a wonderful book, that has, this is where I end, by a wonderful book by a sociologist named Jin Kwan Lee, who was a very well-known student, scholar, researcher at China. She wrote a book called The Spectre of Global China. It is an analysis, as it happens, a sort of revisit, if you will, to this copper industry. And she's interested in the strategies of Chinese capital. So what she does is she compares all these different capitals that are assembled in the copper industry and tries to figure out what is peculiar to China. And when the price of copper dips, as it does after 2008, footloose international capital, they disappear. Chinese capital sticks around, because Chinese capital is less interested in profit and more interested in, well, she says, copper. They need copper for their industry. And so they reconstitute, recreate a whole presence of China, very, very controversial and problematic, in fact, presence of China. So the Chinese begin to also recreate old colonial relations. But anyway, that's the end of the story so far, is that actually if you extend the analysis, both spatially and time-wise, you get a whole different vision of the copper industry. That in fact you have to look at things historically to see actually what was peculiar to that moment in time that I took for granted, namely that the price of copper was high. When it falls, then all sorts of other things follow, and you cannot understand that unless you go global, and that is the lesson of Thomas and Znaniecki. You can't understand what is happening in Tarnowo without understanding what's happening in Germany and the United States. That is what they understood. You can't understand what's happening in Poland before the First World War, unless you understand what's also happening in Chicago. They were the pioneers of global ethnography, and we need more and more of them. And I hope this conference will inspire people to continue the tradition of Thomas and Znaniecki. Thank you very much.